Hello and welcome to Tonight a Date from the RSGB. Aircraft scatter is the name given to bouncing VHF and UHF amateur radio signals off high-flying aircraft, effectively hitching a ride with someone else's plane to extend our usual working range. For example, if you get involved in the monthly UK activity contests on the very high frequencies, then you'll probably almost certainly already be using aircraft scatter routinely, even if you didn't realise it. So how does aircraft scatter actually work, and how can we make the best of it? Someone who knows is our guest tonight, Ian White, GM3SEK. Welcome to Tonight a Date, Ian. Can you briefly tell us about what you'll be talking about this evening?
Thank you, David, and thanks to RSGB for inviting me. Welcome to the shack here in southwest Scotland. Thanks for coming. I'm going to be doing an entry-level talk this time on aircraft scatter because there's a lot of people, as David has just mentioned, who are using aircraft scatter without knowing it, and I want to clarify that so that try to make it possible to move on from being a passive consumer of this interesting propagation mode to actually becoming an active user and making it work for us.
Sounds good, Ian. We're looking forward to it. And if you're watching this on Monday the 7th of October, then this is live. And you can ask questions or make comments on either YouTube chat or BATC messaging at any time during the presentation or straight afterwards. Please include your first name and call sign if you have one within every message. And note that you can make this video stream fill your screen on most devices, usually by double clicking on the picture or pressing the full screen button. But now let's go back to Ian for a hitchhiker's guide to aircraft scatter.
Thank you, David. And good evening once again. Thanks again for being here. Well, one thing you notice as time goes by as a radio amateur, the things that we learn about tend to be kind of patchy, is the best way to describe it. Once we've learned the basics for a license, then the further routes that we take through amateur radio seem to be governed by personal choice and sheer blind chance. And for all of us, that inevitably leaves big gaps in our knowledge. Also, if we don't go all the way through to the UK full license, there are lots of interesting things that we might never find out about at all, or might never find out the truth about at all. So tonight's topic is certainly one of these. It has been very much hidden from us, so let's see what's really going on. Well, first of all, as David has said, I'm talking mainly about the VHF and UHF bands, particularly the three middle bands, 2 meters, 70 centimeters, 23 centimeters, where aircraft scatter is the most prevalent. It also works on 4 meters down to 6 meters, and it also works on microwaves up to at least 10 gigahertz. So these middle bands are the ones I'm going to mean most of the time, unless I mention otherwise. And then narrowing it down even further, the parts of the bands where radio amateurs are indulging in this traditional practice of chasing DX. Distance is a big thing traditionally in amateur radio, and it's certainly true on VHF and UHF. Other parts of the bands are used for different things, and that raises some issues. So one of the first things I'm going to do is a quick drive-by of what propagation modes we have on these bands, not to tell you everything about them, but simply to help identify where aircraft scatter fits in terms of range and availability. And it turns out it fits right in the middle, which is kind of why we miss, one of the reasons why we miss that we're using it. It's just there. Hasn't always been, and that's another part of the story. We're also going to listen to an aircraft scatter contact hitching a ride between Scotland and Cornwall on 2 meters, and we'll unpick that to see what's been happening and what wider lessons we can learn from it, that example. And then this question of why haven't we heard more about it? So we're going to take a diversion into a little bit of aviation history, among other things, and then move on to making more and better use of it. So I've divided it into level 1 and level 2. Level 1 is the passive consumer, where the only important thing to do is to be aware that aircraft scatter's happening. Level 2 is changing it up and making things happen. Yeah, it's worth noticing as well that VHF and UHF users fall into 2 groups. To the people I'm calling local users, short-range users, signals from beyond the horizon can cause interference, so they're not really keen on that. And then there's the amateur radio DXers, who are saying signals from beyond the horizon, that's what we're here for, bring it on. And it is radio amateurs who treat these longer distance propagation modes as opportunities rather than a little bit of a nuisance. It's nice to be aware of who we are and where we fit in to the pecking order. Now then, let's just have a quick tour of VHF and UHF propagation modes, and focusing on particularly things like the typical range, availability, and are any special techniques required. The first one, normal tropospheric propagation, it's a mouthful, is our very definition of what a normal signal is. It's always available on all bands, it's around us all the time. The kind of signal, it's basically a constant level, plus or minus some fading. It doesn't need special techniques because we just said that this is all normal. Okay, tropospheric propagation. Well, the troposphere is this lowest level of the Earth's atmosphere where we live and where the weather happens. And it's been known for quite a long time that this kind of propagation is affected by the weather, which means that you can expect some degree of fading, but that's kind of factored in, again, into our definition of what's normal for radio signals going beyond the horizon. So typical ranges, well, out to the line of sight and then beyond for a few 100 kilometers, depends on the band, and it depends on each station's equipment. So, okay, this is the stuff we know. Please consider this as our baseline, and we take it on from here. The next one that we hear about is extended tropospheric propagation, where the weather conditions form things like a settled high pressure zone covering much of Western Europe for us. Distant stations come up out of the noise much stronger than normal. Range extends easily, typically to over 1,000 kilometers. 2,000 and more is not unknown. And apart from dealing with the adrenaline and the excitement, no special techniques are needed. It happens a few times a year, as we know. So tropospheric propagation gives you line of sight to a few hundred or several hundred kilometers. Okay. I'll then just put up together 3 groups of propagation, all of which are to do with things happening in the E layer of the ionosphere. and one hop off that gives us a range typically of 500 to 2,300 kilometers, but not all the time. Sporadic E ionization is particularly, it happens on 6 meters, it happens on 10 meters, it affects the lower HF bands, but in the VHF bands, it goes up to about 144 megahertz, very, very, very rarely beyond that. And at that frequency, at the top of its range, it's only available for a few hours, a few times a year. Signal strength's variable, but no special operating techniques apart from being able to deal a bit better with the adrenaline. Meteor scatter is particles drifting into the Earth's upper atmosphere and becoming ionized as they burn up somewhere around the top of the E layer, which is why you get the same kind of range. It's not directly related to sporadic E, it just happens at about the same height. The defining feature of meteor scatter is that it's intermittent. You get pings and bursts lasting a few milliseconds to a few seconds, usually. So high-speed data is the best mode, one kind or another. It used to be done on CW with variable speed tape recorders. As soon as a good data mode was invented, everybody jumped ship, and that's what they're using now. Auroral scattering, this is charged particles from the sun, again arriving into the top of the Earth's ionosphere and atmosphere and being trapped magnetically at about the height of the E layer, so you get about the same ranges. Again, a few openings a year, more than in previous years. Now we're at the top of the sunspot cycle, and if you're watching this live, please don't go. But every now and again, my phone's going to go off to say there's aurora on 2 meters. But don't worry, there'll be another one along in a few days or a couple of weeks. The characteristic of auroral signals is that they're very distorted, and the best results come from moderate speed CW, although data modes are making a bid to be able to deal with these unusual propagation conditions. But okay, enough of that. That's just a quick list of the best known VHF DX propagation modes. Now the question is, where does aircraft scatter fit in? And the answer is right between normal tropospheric propagation and extended tropo. So we're getting distances from a few hundred kilometers up to about 800 kilometers, which is the range that you get in a single hop using an aircraft at the top of normal commercial cruising heights, about 40,000 feet. You're going to have to excuse the mixture of units, but as you're probably well aware, the aviation industry measured its heights in feet. The other interesting feature of aircraft scatter is it's available several times an hour. Often more than one route opens up at the same time, and that's where things can get a bit confusing if you don't have a bit of background information. And the defining feature is that you get stronger signals, but only for a few minutes, because then the aircraft that's providing this reflection flies away on its way, and the path drops out again. Now, at entry level, you just curse the violent fading and you try to complete the contact, but it doesn't require anything particularly special. It is so non-special, as I've already said, that it just gets confused with ordinary tropospheric propagation. So that's where it fits in. When you push it a bit farther, then yes, it does begin to require special techniques to prepare for a contact and then to be pretty businesslike about it, because you don't know how long you've actually got to complete it. So I think that's about all I want to say about propagation modes for the moment, but it does explain why aircraft scatter has been so easily mistaken for short-lived episodes of normal or good tropo. Right, let's have a listen to some. This is Scotland to Cornwall on 2 meters. This is me at the north end of the Irish Sea, not in a particularly high location. I can't quite see the sea, but the antennas just can. Down at the bottom here is Darrell 2E0 VCC portable on Bodmin Moor in Cornwall. Distance is about 455 kilometres, but it's not an easy path because it's quite obstructed. Coming up from the south, you have the Preseli Mountains, drop into Cardigan Bay, Clean Peninsula, then the edge of Anglesey, up into the Irish Sea, and then the Isle of Man. I'm turning this thing sideways, so I'm just about, let's go back. Then the Isle of Man, which is quite close and a little bit in my face in that direction if I want to go directly north-south. The other thing you'll notice is there are aircraft icons on this map, and as the talk goes on, this particular presentation is going to become more and more familiar to you. Right, so we can see there's an aircraft there in particular which is going to prove very interesting. It's a medium-size airliner. It's probably going into Dublin or Belfast, but at the moment it's flying just about straight across the signal path, the line that we've drawn on the map. There's a couple more which would turn up in a few minutes, and the software has coded those red. The software we'll find out about, as I say. Now, laying it on its side, you can see that the Isle of Man is very much in my face. Okay, the scale is distorted, but it's 50 kilometers away, and it goes up to 600 meters at the top of Snae Fell. Darrell at the other end, he can see the Isle of Man, or at least he's got a theoretical line of sight. In other words, all this stuff in central Wales is not going to affect the path between us. The limiting factor is getting over the Isle of Man. Now then, let's see what the aircraft can do for us. That's redrawing the same thing, but a much greater height scale, up to 10,000, 12,000 meters. On this scale, the Isle of Man shrinks down to almost nothing, but this red line defines the boundary of how high an aircraft needs to be for me to be able to see it over the top of the Isle of Man. The yellow line does the same for Darrell, so for both of us to see it, it has to be in this shaded area. and we usually call this the scatter zone. And you can see the mark there where this aircraft is just flying into the scatter zone. So it's well clear of the Isle of Man. The height scale, I'll just say something else about this. The height scale here, it's tiny, it's scarcely readable, but this stripe across the top, the dotted line across the top represents 40,000 feet, which is just about the limit of commercial cruising heights for maximum fuel efficiency and to get up well above the weather. So you'll find aircraft which are established on their route will climb up to here. This is just under 30,000 feet. They'll climb up to this level, they'll set themselves a cruise level, and then they will fly in pretty much a straight line until they make a turn onto a new straight line. So, right, let's see what we can find. I'm going to play you the audio in a moment, but the first thing I want to do is just show you the soundtrack as recorded, and because a lot of it is just me calling Darryl in Cornwall and listening to noise because he's not there yet, the path isn't there yet, the aircraft isn't there yet. So nothing, I call him again. You can just about see a little bit of difference. There's something underneath there. So this time, this is where I start playing back, and this is where I start calling him for real and expect that he'll start to come back. And yeah, sure enough, he does. Up out of the noise he comes. And then we make our QSO. He is actually growing stronger, you will hear as the QSO goes on. So somewhere around here is where I'm just about to start the audio recording.
2E0 VCC portable, 2E0 VCC portable, Golf Mike 3 Sierra Echo Kilo, Golf Mike 3 Sierra Echo Kilo, over.
Over.
Golf Mike 3 Sierra Echo Kilo, Golf Mexico 3 Sierra Echo Kilo, go ahead Ian.
Yeah,
2E0
he's just told me to go ahead.
Evening Darryl, 54075, 54075, IO 74 Sierra Romeo, 74 Sierra Romeo, over.
This was the contest information.
Roger, many thanks. Been a bit busy like yourself this evening. You're 55066. 5566. Italy Oscar 70 Sierra Papa. Over. Yeah, Roger. Come up nicely now, Darryl. Sun 3 thanks very much indeed, and all the very best. Cheers. Many thanks to the multiplier in 73. Bye-bye for now.
Yeah, okay. So that's a QSO in the bag, and I hope you can hear that when the recording, this video is put on the RSGB YouTube channel and so on. Then you could also listen to this with headphones on, and it will be a bit clearer. Apologies for that. I can't hear what you can or cannot hear. So
we could hear it fine though, Ian, just to reassure you. So I hope everybody at home could. But as you say, people can always play this back later. But
yeah, okay. Thanks very much, David. Right. So what have we just seen and heard? First of all, that aircraft scatter delivered a QSO on what was otherwise a dead channel. It wasn't there before the aircraft came, and eventually it would fade out. Had either of us suspected that it might fade out, then there'd have been a bit less chit-chat at the end. But it only works while the aircraft is in the reflection zone, which is close to the straight line on the map between the two stations, and visible. The aircraft has to be visible above the horizon to both stations. And given that, aircraft scatter signals sound quite normal. So yeah, they continue. Even a distant one is easily mistaken for normal tropo. But I can simply assure you that on that night it wasn't. And it's classic hitchhiking. The aircraft has cost somebody several millions of dollars, but to us the use of it is completely free. And okay, given the propensity of one aircraft cheap flight operator in particular to try to charge for everything, there's a certain satisfaction in aircraft scatter of getting a free ride. So why haven't we heard more about it? And the first thing I'm going to say is that aircraft scatter has only been around the way we know it for about 20, maybe 30 years, which in terms of amateur radio speed of uptake, that's perhaps relatively new. Just look at this. This is an interesting piece of social history, if nothing else. Global airline passengers in each year from 1945 up to 2021, which is just after the COVID shutdown. I'll come to that in a minute. But as you can see, nothing happened until the early 1960s. Prior to that, airline travel was a rich person's privilege, but gradually things began to move, and I'm going to put about 1970 as the time when it really got some momentum and started into steady growth. 1990, I'm not quite sure what happened there. 2000 was 9/11, and it knocked it back. It stopped it growing for 2 or 3 years, but then global airline travel, it didn't just resume, but it resumed expanding at a greater rate. 2008, global financial crisis, again, that didn't really stop it. It just encouraged it to afterwards to keep going. The only thing about COVID that shut things down was intergovernmental agreements. So flights, it's not just flights, it was destinations which were no longer accessible. But since then, global passenger numbers have recovered. They're still increasing, but not at the rate that they were doing in the early 2000s. The other thing, of course, is that air freight has paralleled this, and as was pointed out during COVID, airliners which are underbooked will often make up their load with freight pallets. So there's some linkage between the two. But okay, you can see how it's grown from practically nothing at 1970. So by 2000 it was all around us. So why didn't we notice more aircraft scatter? given that we found ourselves in this situation, we woke up sometime in the early 2000s, and we found that the skies were full of planes. So why didn't we catch on to this as an amateur community sooner? And I think the answer is that some of us did. Australia was very, very active very, very early, because it's such a big country that the path from, say, Sydney to Melbourne is an aircraft scatter path. It isn't a normal short-range tropo path, and so on as you go on across the Australian Bight and so on. So the Australians were in early. The Americans, not far behind. Maybe we're a bit slower in Europe. I don't know. But there wasn't a trigger event, certainly. There's nothing like the launch of a satellite, which was the only other comparable man-made propagation mode. That has a trigger event. Aircraft scatter never did. And then there's that patchy knowledge thing that I've already mentioned, that we maybe didn't have the clues scattered around this gap in our knowledge to be able to put everything together, because, as I keep on saying, it sounds so normal. So, right, I think that's the introduction to how aircraft scatter came about, and now I'm going to move on to talk about making better use of the mode, and I'm going to divide it into two levels, as I've already said. Level one is the consumer level, being aware of aircraft scatter when it's happening. Level two is becoming more proactive, making things happen. And both of these are going to benefit if you have a bit more understanding about how aircraft scatter works. Right. This is it's a computer-generated ghost image of the familiar twin-engined, narrow-bodied, single-aisle workhorse aircraft that flits back and forth across Europe, likewise the United States, and it happens to be just about big enough to support aircraft scatter, like the example I just showed you, I just played for you. It's just about the right size, but if we want to know how aircraft scatter works, then the first thing to realize is optical ideas like it's like a mirror in the sky, don't cut it. That isn't going to tell you what you need to know, because optics is all about the behavior of light in and around objects, the interaction of light with objects that are 1 billion times bigger than the wavelength of light. Here, this type of aircraft, 737 A320 class, they're about 35 meters long, 35 meters wide, give or take. So that's about 15 wavelengths on 2 meters. And by the time you get up to 23 centimeters, it's something like 150 wavelengths. Looking at 2 meters, an object 15 wavelengths high, wide, 15 wavelengths long is not going to behave like a classical mirror. So how can we explain what's happening? Well, okay, this is a radio question, so maybe we should start using some radio thinking. Things like antennas, RF currents, electromagnetic fields. We know about this stuff, and this is another place where it applies. So imagine the aircraft is flying about halfway between you and the person you want to work, some long way away. Your station is down below and a few hundred kilometers behind us. The other station down below at ground level a few hundred kilometers ahead of us, which is how the available range adds up to about 800 kilometers. Okay. When I say your signal, or my signal, we're actually talking about the electromagnetic field that our antennas have projected in the direction that we want. So this entire aircraft is bathed in the EM field that was sent out. And okay, a metal object in an electromagnetic field, both of which are moving. The metal object is going to have RF currents induced upon it. It's going to behave, whether you intended it to or not, as an accidental receiving antenna. But wait, there's more, because a metal object with RF currents crawling all over it, for whatever reason, is also going to behave as an accidental transmitting antenna. In other words, you've radiated a signal. This thing is re-radiating it, but in a different way. In a different way, which is influenced very strongly by the aircraft's structure as measured in wavelengths, and the attitude of the aircraft relative to the incoming field. But I've tried with this bunch of arrows to give you some idea of the magnitudes of the signals that will be re-radiated. Longer arrows mean stronger signals. And if that looks familiar, well, yes, it ought to be. It looks an awful lot like the radiation pattern of a directional antenna, a deliberately directional antenna, like a Yagi. So at that point, the next thing is, in that case, let's make a wireframe model of the aircraft and see how it behaves as an antenna. How does it radiate? If we can put it in an electromagnetic field using the antenna modeling software, then we can see how it re-radiates as well. And here's one that somebody, fortunately, in Australia prepared early. It's a 737 flying more or less same attitude, same direction, viewed side on. So the transmitted field is coming in below the rear, and the aircraft is creating this thing that looks like a very bad attempt at a radiation pattern. The reason it looks like a bad attempt, there are actually two reasons. One is nobody had ever designed it to be a radiating antenna. The other is that it's an object many, many, many times greater in size than the wavelength. And that, by the way, is 1.3 gigahertz in this example. The bigger the object is in terms of the number of wavelengths, the more complicated the radiation pattern becomes. And it breaks up, as you can see, into lots of spiky minor lobes with lots of spiky deep nulls as well. The likeliest direction to be getting a re-radiated signal back down to Earth is not going to be off this main lobe, despite the fact that it's bigger, but probably off these first 2 or 3 major side lobes. Those are the ones that are that are fat enough to deliver some signal, some usable signal down to ground level. So yeah, what we've got is an accidental receiving antenna and an accidental transmitting antenna. That's how aircraft scattering, reflection, let's not argue about the exact terminology because neither is totally accurate, but that's how aircraft scatter works anyway. Another thing we need to notice is the strongest signal is the onward scattered forward going component. Backscatter is not anything like as strong. But let's have a look here at the aircraft, same aircraft, illuminated this time from below and to one side. And what happens then is same thing, but less strong. And the other thing is that when an aircraft is flying crossways to the signal path between the two stations, it remains in the scatter zone for a much shorter time before it pops out the other side and the signal disappears. Lots of these things that I've just been saying in the past 5 minutes, you wouldn't see any of this from classical optics. So yeah, forget the mirror in the sky thing. The only positive advantage is that we've got lots of aircraft. So level 1, rules of thumb, things to remember even if you don't do anything about it. Larger aircraft gives you stronger signals. Look for the 737, A320 size aircraft and larger. Very much bigger aircraft will give you very much stronger reflections, but there are fewer of them. Ignore aircraft that are too small or too low. Too low simply means that they can't be seen by one end user or the other. Aircraft that are too small, which are often the same category, they don't give strong enough reflections. So you look for these medium to larger size aircraft at their level cruise altitudes, 30 to 40,000 feet, typically. Oh yeah, ignore military aircraft except for large freighters, because they are, other military aircraft tend to be too small, too fast, and actually trying very hard to be totally invisible to radio signals. So they're not going to help you. And finally, an aircraft that never crosses the signal path under any circumstances, is not flying up on any connected route. You won't hear anything from that. Just ignore that completely. Flying along the signal path between the two stations is best, but don't ignore the crossways paths because sometimes they're all you've got. And then get to know. This is where you start to move up a bit from level 1. Get to know which aircraft traffic patterns will actually favour you. And all I can do here is give you a little analysis of what my situation is. It wasn't anything of my own tuning. It wasn't anything of my own choosing, I should say, but I think it illustrates the way that you need to think about it. Well, okay, here's me in southwest Scotland, and I've got a good location out over the Irish Sea. Forget the aircraft. I can beam down across the Lancashire Plain, down the Cheshire Gap, just clip the edge of the Pennines, just avoiding it, and be able to put a good signal down into London. I can do that without aircraft, but I'm very, very lucky that that same line into a London target area is also the airline industry's M1, and that's going to take you up to somewhere Liverpool, Manchester area before it either heads out across the Irish Sea or bears right to go up to Scotland and so on. The aircraft are pretty much where I need them, so I'm always conscious about that. It also means that if I'm trying to work stations, I don't have to think about are there aircraft. There almost certainly are, or there will be shortly. So I know that if somebody's a bit weak, that doesn't necessarily mean that I've worked everybody or that I need to turn my beam. There'll be more aircraft coming. Flip side of that, as you've seen, is the north-south path, where there are only crosswise aircraft. There's no real civil aircraft route that actually works here for me. So I've got to use crosswise aircraft, and I've got to try to pick the ones that are going to be helpful to me, if there are any. I mean, here's the whole of southern Wales at the moment devoid of aircraft, so that's not easy for me. There's other stuff on the map here. For example, this fella, it isn't flying on any of the regular routes, and the reason for that is that it's a freight aircraft. It's quite large, but if I click to get the flight number, it turns out that this is a DHL international freighter. So they don't fly the same central UK routes. It's probably come from Belgium or Germany. And that means if right now I want to make use of that, I've got to turn the beam and hope that there's somebody in the Netherlands just in line between me and it and the possible target station. So, okay, that's the kind of thinking that goes into making better use of aircraft scatter, and then you build on that. But knowing your own good aircraft routes is a very important thing indeed. And I would say, for example, anybody in the Midlands who can beam into the arrival stacks over London is going to get a free ticket across into France, considerably deeper into France than I can. So, and similarly from the West Country, you can go through there into the Netherlands. Right, but, oh yeah, I think it's about here in the talk that I start to say, beware of studying these maps too much, because it can be a real time waster. You've got to do that offline and just spend some time thinking about it. Right, so that's almost all the level 1 rules of thumb. Just one more, which is that aircraft scatter in the UK dies after about 9:30 local time. This is nothing to do with aviation. It's due to market forces, because passengers want some onward travel time before it gets too late at night, and they don't like flights which land much after 9:30. Right, moving quickly on to level 2, because I need to be closing shortly. Making things happen, that includes all of level 1, and then to start using software. And there's just a couple of points I want to make here. All these aircraft position maps that you see, they all come from the same ADS-B automated reports from the same aircraft, giving position, speed, height, and so on. And all of these reports get picked up by listening stations down on the ground, fed into servers, which then collate the information and put it on a map. The problem is most software presents the wrong kind of information for what we want in amateur radio. For example, here's Flight Radar 24. It's a very popular site for good reason for people who are following aviation, and it's probably a good kind of map to stare at and see where aircraft seem to be flying straight routes line astern. That's good. You can see somewhat buried in clutter. You can see my airborne M1 lines in there, but the rest of the information, if I click an aircraft, want to know what it is, I don't need to see a photograph of the aircraft. I don't need to know that it's bound for Los Angeles. I know it's too big to be bound for Belfast, and after that it's off across the Atlantic. What I don't see immediately is the height and the speed and the information that I really need. So it's nice, but it isn't really intended for us. So I strongly recommend that you use specialized amateur radio software, and the one in Europe is called Air Scout, and that's the thing that's been generating quite a few of my slides. So the advantage of it is it allows you to put in a target station as well as your own station. You can pick the target station from an enormous database of active VHF and UHF amateurs. It will draw the line for you. It will highlight the aircraft that are likely to be contributing to giving you a QSO opportunity, either now immediately or very soon. And it will tell you how soon it might be flying across the signal path between the two stations. So there's a lot of useful information there which you don't get in the same way from things like Flight Radar. It will also do the terrain profile and the little diagram of the scatter zone, showing in this case where each of the 4 aircraft is, 1, 2, 3, 4, along the line between the two stations. But normally I drag that down and try to maximize the map area. There's a great deal more about that. I'm not quite sure how to describe that, but there are numbers of videos, I think, and various instructions for how to configure Air Scout, because it needs a bit of getting used to, but once you've done that, then it really, really talks to you and brings up the opportunities that you should be going for. It integrates with an ON4KST chat and much more, but beyond that, it's bordering on too much information. Even if it's relevant information, it's too much. But AirScout is the one that gives you the best balance. So there's that, and avoiding too much information. And that is really the end of this introductory level. Thank you for watching and listening, and I hope you find it interesting. I'm just going to summarize with a few final points. First of all, we've realized now that aircraft scatter opportunities are going on all around us, so they're there to be used to make the best of them. It's fascinating getting into this stuff about the aviation industry, but beware of too much information. Remember when you're supposed to be using the radio. If you find a good way of doing that, by the way, do let me know. And to all of us amateur radio hitchhikers, it's free. So thank you very much. Here are some web links which I will pass on to David, and he will make sure that they appear as quickly as possible in a clickable form. So I'll leave those for the moment. But yeah, thanks very much. And David, Tammy, back to you, please.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Ian. I bet there's quite a few questions that you've got at home on that. What a fascinating talk. I can tell you that. I mean, lots of the comments coming in, Ian, are, what a great talk and how fascinating this is. So really good. So anyway, if you've got questions or comments at home and you haven't already done them and you'd like to share them with us, then please do it now on either YouTube chat or BATC messaging. And please don't forget to include your first name and your call sign in every message if you can. Okay, so Ian, where do we start? Let's start with a question that came in quite early on, which might be controversial. I don't know. G6AD says, do you think it's okay to actively use aircraft scatter in VHF contests, or is it considered cheating? That's a good question.
I think I'm very firm on that for two reasons. One is you are going to use aircraft scatter whether you like it or not, whether you want to or not, I'm afraid. And no, I certainly don't consider that cheating, in that, well, I would if it was using a satellite, for example, because that would be using the satellite in the way in which it was originally intended, but as a communication device. But in the case of aircraft scatter, it's just another. If you didn't know that there were airlines who are kindly putting these things up there for us, then you would think it was natural. No, I don't see that as cheating at all. It gives an advantage, yes. Unfair advantage? I don't think so. No.
No, because I mean, it is not a natural phenomenon exactly as you normally define it, is it? But of course, it's not something you can control, I guess. So it's a matter of luck, as a lot of us. It's a lot of luck with propagation and things like that, because it just comes and goes.
Yeah.
Good, thank you. The next question comes from Mike G4CDF. Oh, he just says that actually he was lucky enough to work Aurora, when you were talking earlier actually in the talk, on 432 megahertz in the last big opening. So he's obviously using the bands and these conditions to the best.
Well done, Mike. Yeah, I've never done that one.
Colin M0XCA, could I ask, does the polarization of the transmitted signal affect the effectiveness of the scattered signal? That was on BATC. And also a very similar question that actually came in, and I must credit him. Mike GU4EON says also the same thing. Does antenna polarization matter?
I don't know for sure. I suspect it will. It will matter, but there's very little you can do about it unless, for example, both stations agree to use compatible circular polarization, which isn't the standard. So if you're operating freestyle, so to speak, then there's not much that two stations cooperating can do about polarization, except just blaze away.
Okay, thank you. Steve, I'm sorry I don't have any other name or call sign with this. Says, thanks for your presentation, most interesting. Where is the Air Scout aircraft data received from, as my sources, I guess that's Steve's sources, have stopped working?
Air Scout in particular, being a free amateur resource, has had some difficulties with finding reliable sources of collated aircraft data. For example, the first thing that needs to happen to all this data when it comes into a central collating point is there's an awful lot of duplicates from different ground-based receiving stations which need to be weeded out. The whole thing needs to be thinned down and then put on a server that somebody else can use. And if that's an amateur operation, then it needs and deserves support. I certainly put money into one of the Air Scout feeds if it only pays for the electricity bill. And I beg his pardon, I can't remember the call sign of the Danish amateur who's doing this for us. But yeah, the only way around it I've found is to choose data sources that are likely to be reliable, and then notice that Air Scout includes facilities for at least 3 of those at the same time, so that hopefully if one goes down, another one is still up. It isn't easy. It's not 100% reliable, and that's one of the things where something like Flight Radar 24 has a far better ability to provide regular feeds, because it's handling quite a lot of subscription funds. So yeah, no definite recommendation there, but yeah, I'll see if I can find a few notes on that.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you. As you say, it's easy to take these things for granted that appear to be free on the web, but of course a lot of them do have to. They use resources, and so it's nice to donate to keep these things going. Got lots of questions coming in, so I'd like to get them to you. I hope you can stay with us a little while.
Yeah.
Stuart Wilkinson, by the way, points out maybe we had aircraft scatter years ago but didn't really realise what it was, which is quite possible, isn't it? Maybe there weren't things like modelling and things that you've talked about, the aircraft modelling.
Yeah, that's true. Hi, Stuart. And I think that was true. It was also a case where thinking about it, I think it was there, but just not in the same numbers, and aircraft was smaller, and we certainly didn't have the same resources, but mostly I think we just didn't recognize it. It crept up on us.
Yes. Robin M0JQQ says he was looking at the time in your talk at A320s now, and he said there were 8 on the airline M1, as you called it, which is a great phrase. Martin M7LUN says, is the radio antenna model of the 747 online somewhere to view? I guess the 747 was the big jumbo jet that we all knew. I don't believe there's many of them flying now, is there? You've got things like the A380, and I'm not a great aircraft aficionado, but I think there are lots of others. So are there many other radio maps that are created for other aircraft?
Yes, if you Google something like B747 wireframe model, then you will get several of these, because the 747 has a lot of fans and who've tried to create these images. In fact, I very nearly did use the 747 as an example. The only reason I didn't was because almost all of them are shown with the landing gear down, which was not the message I wanted to convey. But yeah, the 747s, and there's still large numbers of 747-400s flying freight.
Freight, oh, okay. I thought that it had all largely been retired for passengers, so yeah. So lots of questions to get to you, and lots of honestly compliments as well. Most informative, very interesting, Ian, all that sort of thing as well. David Butler says lots of Doppler at 10 gigahertz, but CW is best, he says.
Yes, yeah. David is one of the experts at bouncing 10 gigahertz signals off whatever is available up there, and I doubt if he'd regard it as cheating. but yeah, lots of Doppler there has to be.
Now this is an interesting one as well, talking about different aircraft and more modern aircraft coming into use now. Peter Hutchison, G4URT, says, Ian, with the ever-increasing use of composite materials in the aircraft industry, would this be an issue in the future? I don't know. It was a question that occurred to me while I was putting these slides together, and I don't know. It's a question well worth asking somebody. Does somebody here know? I imagine they do, because there's been quite a lot of materials research done from the point of view of reducing the radar reflection cross section. So I guess it's certainly not going to have this.
I think I know somebody whom I could ask if he isn't listening already.
All right. Well, if you know the answer to that, then if you're fairly quick, and you can pop it onto either BATC or YouTube chat, and then I'll be sure to read it out. But yeah, I'd have thought that composites would have at least a very different sort of reflection, characteristics. And I suppose then extending that even further, you could think about would a aircraft full of passengers have different reflected effects than, say, an aircraft full of freight? But anyway, we're probably overthinking that now.
I think I can answer that last one, which is that the RF currents that are flowing are literally flowing on the outside of the aircraft due to the skin effect. So what's inside, I think, has very little difference. Makes very little difference.
Even with composites, you think? That's what I was wondering.
Yeah,
but anyway.
down to the limit where it becomes certifiably transparent. Then that's a very different game.
We never thought we'd be talking about this tonight, did we? Anyway, ADG6AD comes back and says, what is the typical duration of an aircraft scatter QSO opportunity? Well,
it varies from a few seconds or a fraction of a second. For example, if you listen to a beacon for a long time, you occasionally hear things which I think the visual equivalent would be a glint. It's just a little flash. It's there and it's gone. and then after that it's continuous in extent up to a few minutes. So
I guess it would be good for contest. You mentioned contesting quite a lot, and where a contesting over tends to be quite short and sweet, and I guess it's ideal for that, but maybe not for a rag chew.
Yeah, that's about it. Yes, and yeah, a lot of contesting as well, particularly in the regular contests, is also saying hi to your mates, the people with whom you share the common interests and might see at a rally or a convention about once a year, but nevertheless, just sort of touching base with people. There's time enough for that, as you noticed in the QSO between myself and Darryl to his era VCC. Had things been a bit more difficult, then we would have been that much more business-like. But there's a cut-off that if you try and go too fast, the other guy can't get it down in his log, and you might lose the contact anyway. So you're trying to sit in that zone. Oh yeah. One thing that is very much worth passing on. I think the moment's just arrived to do it. Somebody called me a few weeks ago in one of the UK activity contests, and we'll call him Robert, GW4GUF Portable, because that was his name and call sign. And I called CQ. He came back with a reasonable signal, and it was Golf Whiskey 4 Golf United Foxtrot Portable Aircraft.
Oh,
I've never heard anybody do that before, and I'm going to start. When just saying that one word gave me the tip off that this isn't Troppo. We are on a time limit. Let's be businesslike about it. And yeah, I thought that was very clever. I'm definitely going to start doing that when it's appropriate.
Yeah, linked to our new license conditions and things as well, isn't it? I did see a video on this, I think, Ian. I think I saw a video someone did show me. That was quite recent as well. I expect you expected to be, but actually it was a pilot. In that case, it was a pilot of an aircraft who used an amateur radio on board his own aircraft.
Yeah,
making a contact.
Yeah, that wasn't actually the idea. He wasn't on an aircraft. What he was trying to do was to tell me, this is aircraft scatter.
I see.
You're on a time limit, and I thought that worked extremely well. It certainly kind of woke me up to sort of skip the pleasantries, do the business.
Yeah, and of course we can use different suffixes now, can't we? Because of some of these changes earlier on in the year, we can use different words for almost whatever we want to. So, okay, great.
Yeah.
Mike G4 CDF says, and there's a really great bit of feedback on when we were talking about composites, aircraft made of composites. And he says, for reasons of lightning protection, composite aircraft have a metallic layer. There we are.
There we go. Thank you, Mike.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's it.
Matt Wilkinson says, just for information, if I may, AirScout by default utilises collated ADS-B data on servers provided by Thomas OV3T. If anyone can and wishes to assist with providing ADS-B data, contact OV3T.
Yeah, that was the call sign I was trying to remember. Get AirScout installed first, and there's likely to be something that will give you a feed, so you can see that it's working. But then, I would very much recommend contacting Thomas, because he is doing this. He's not trying to He's not trying to cater for the mass market of civil aviation enthusiasts. He's actually doing this for us, and he just needs to cover his expenses. So thanks for the detachable memory out there. Thank you.
Yeah, it's one of those sites that maybe you can buy a coffee and that sort of thing. Just small donations which help them keep going, don't they?
Yeah, you don't actually buy it. AirScout uploads the information automatically, so there isn't a product that you can buy as such and then sort of plug into your software, because the software goes and collects it.
Actually, what I meant was that you can buy him a coffee, as in it's small donations to help them keep the site going. I think that's
buy a coffee,
cool.
yeah.
Next up, Robin, M0JQQ. OARC have about 50 to 70 feeders into our feed site, which is already shared to other sites. Don't know if we share to AirScout at present, but something to look into perhaps. So that could be useful as an extra resource. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
Bob Emerson, MI0OTC, fantastic insight into a new and for him an unexplored part of our hobby. He asks, would a pan tilt rotator help to track the aircraft possibly?
It would, but you'd need a lot more information than if you're using it to extend your range, then you're really looking for opportunities involving aircraft somewhere about halfway downrange, and at that point you're only talking about elevation angles of 5 to 8 degrees above your local horizon, and pan and tilt, that isn't going to help unless David G4ASR has any further input about what you need with at 10 gigahertz.
Okay, actually, David, I was just going to read his comment out. He's put there, thanks, Ian, and this is G4ASR, aircraft scatter all bands 50 megs to 10 gigahertz, he says.
Yep. Yeah, it'd be interesting, David, if you're still there. Do you feel, for example, at the end of the frequency range at 10 gigahertz, do you or can you use elevation, David?
I guess a lot of people might have this sort of equipment. If they're using dishes already at those sort of frequencies, they may have the sort of equipment that you need.
Yeah, but you've got to know
where you're going to point it, I guess.
Where you're going to point it, and that's the big difficulty.
Yeah, well, that's fascinating stuff, isn't it? I've got a question, if I may self-indulge. Helicopters, I'm not trying to overthink this, but I think of helicopters as something that move relatively slowly, although they're much smaller. Do you get aircraft scatter with helicopters, do you think? Or, because they would be different, they would move slower and even stationary at times.
Yeah, I don't think so, or at least not on the lower bands. As a data point for a very large helicopter on its side, I know that wind turbines cause quite a lot of interaction with 10 gigahertz signals. So, yeah, whatever you do, it's going to have flutter on it, considerable flutter on it.
Yes. Well, it was just a thought, anyway. David G4ASR, that's given him time to come back to us, and he says he uses a normal dish, no elevation at 10 gigahertz.
Yeah, okay, thanks, David. That's one of the values of this when you've got an audience chat and people and people can respond to one another, not just to you.
Yeah, no, it's really good, and there's been a lot of lovely interaction as you'll be able to look at as well, because all of these comments are also available on the archive, because you will be able to watch this back. I saw a couple of comments from people who joined it halfway through, and of course this webinar will be up on the RSGB YouTube channel for everybody to see indefinitely, from later on this evening, along with these comments. They take about a day, actually. The comments will come back tomorrow for people excuse me, looking back at it. We're almost there now, really, with questions. But Carl Littlejohns has said, so what you need for huge DX is an aircraft near you flying to your target and another one flying towards you from the target at the same time. Is that really thinking about this, isn't he?
Yeah. Oh, okay. I'd probably recommend that is investigated by somebody living in line with runway 27 at Heathrow, where you've got endless queues of aircraft flying in.
Yeah. Fantastic. And David, by the way, G4AS, has just come back with saying that he's building a 24 gigs and that will have an elevation drive. So there we are. It'll be wonderful to see what you can do with that. Ian, this has been a wonderful adventure, really, looking into something. I've never looked into it. I've heard it mentioned, like many people, I'm guess watching, but never really understood it, and certainly surprised that it's so effective as well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us tonight and for a wonderful inspirational talk. Something else to do with our hobby. Many thanks, Ian.
Right. Thank you very much indeed, David. And I'll be seeing some people on 70 centimetres tomorrow night. Shameless plug. There'll be aircraft scatter.
Yes. We'll be looking out for lots of those aircraft as well in the air. Thanks very much, Ian. Thank you. And that does conclude this webinar, and thanks again to Ian White, GM3SEK, for tonight's presentation, and to other members of the Tonight at 8 team. Well, the RSGB convention is a great place to learn new things and meet many other like-minded people. Hosted centrally near Milton Keynes, this year's event is this coming weekend, just a few days' time between the 11th and 13th of October. Now, advanced ticket sales end today, the 7th of October, but you'll be able to buy tickets on the door on either day as well. Details of the 2024 convention activities and talks can all be found at rsgb.org/convention. And if you cannot make it there in person, a small selection of the talks as well as interviews will be live streamed on the RSGB YouTube channel. We hope you've enjoyed this Tonight today and that you'll be able to join us next time when Mike Griffiths will be joining us to talk about his book Listening to the Enemy, an account of amateurs like Harry Griffiths, G2DFH, and their work for the military and the Radio Security Service at Bletchley Park and St Earth during World War II. If you'd like to see details of future webinars or watch recordings of previous programs in this series, please visit us at rsgb.org/webinars, where you can also send us comments and feedback. And if you subscribe to the RSGB's YouTube channel, you'll be notified of all upcoming Tonight at 8 webinars, as well as other new videos and presentations from the Society on a wide range of amateur radio topics. Thanks for joining us this evening, and until next time, this is David G7URP signing off and clear. Bye-bye.